Hello and welcome to the Heritage Foundation's Lewis Lehrman Auditorium. I'm Andrew Parks, the Assistant Director of Lectures and Seminars. Thank you for joining us today. I just wanted to take the opportunity to remind everyone in-house to silence their cell phones and encourage those watching online to submit questions at any time by emailing speaker@heritage.org. Hosting today's program is the founder of Heritage Foundation, Dr. Ed Fullman. We can begin.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my very great pleasure to welcome you to our Lewis Lehrman Auditorium today, and particularly to welcome our guest speaker. Deepak Lal has an extraordinary CV, which I was going to say you can read on the inside back cover of the book, but alas, the book is not available, but that's another story. Deepak's educated in London, in India, then at Oxford. He holds chairs even today, 2 chairs, one at UCLA, the Coleman Chair Emeritus in Economics, and one at University College London, Emeritus also. He has been the senior economist at the World Bank. He has been very much involved in what we call IFIs, International Financial Institutions around the world. He started life as a member of the Foreign Service. If he lived in any one place long enough, you could say he was part of at least one swamp. But because he has homes at the moment in Delhi, London, Los Angeles, and I think at the Cosmos Club here in Washington, it's hard to really pin him down. This book, I will say I got a very early copy of it about a month ago, and it wasn't until a couple days ago that I started reading it. And it's amazing because what Deepak does is so absolutely congruent with what many of us have been saying, only he does it with much more rigor and intellectual enthusiasm, starting out with intellectual curiosity in terms of pointing out what the real challenges for the future are. And I think he and I certainly agree what that real challenge is, because I should say that he also has been a visiting professor at Fudan in Shanghai and the University of Beijing. And so he knows up close what the major challenge is. I've just given away your secret, what the major challenge is. Professor Lal is the former president of the Mont Pelerin Society, a well-known international economist in so many different areas, and this is, I think, his 24th or 25th book. Deepak, will you come up and tell us about War or Peace?
First, let me apologize that the book is not available. And this is Oxford. I'd given up publishing with Oxford many, many years ago because I wrote a book for them which is called The Hindu Equilibrium. And my wife, we were in LA there, she went to the local Borders and wanted a copy. And the chap said, no. She said, what's the subject matter? It's economics. He said, not published. So she said, well, so you asked the title. Oh, Hindu, so it must be in religion. So she went up, and of course, in the religious section. So I was so pissed off. I was in New York, so I went to see the big honcho OUP to protest, and I saw on his thing, he was out for 5 minutes, a little memo in which some youngster of his office had written, OUP must do something about promoting its books. This chap, this big honcho, had written, OUP just makes books available. It does not promote them. But now they don't even make books available because because this chap had sent me an email, I think at the end of, they came out in India in June, and he sent me an email saying, oh, it'll all be ready to be distributed in this thing from mid-August. So as I said, I was meeting, and then I just found out from Bridget that he said that, no, they don't have any copies yet, which is ridiculous. Anyways, let me just tell you about the book, and I think as it's not available, maybe the best thing for me is to read out part of the preface, which tells you what the book's about. I started this book. I've been going to China, I think it must be the mid-1980s, yeah. And I've been going to Fudan in Shanghai, in Beijing. So it's been incredible, actually, because I've seen this incredible transformation of this place. And I got to know some of the politicians pretty well. Now, in 2011, there was a conference at Fudan in which they had not just economists, international relations, people, all sorts of people there. And in the middle of this, a chap got up, an army general, and he began by saying, various things. And he said, I don't see why the Western Pacific should be an American lake. And then he went on to say, but it's time now that we should move the Americans back to Guam. And then his final statement was, this might require a short, sharp war. Whereupon someone got up, quite rightly, a foreigner, not me, someone else got up, and said, the last time someone tried that, see what happened. But that's the first time. Then I heard, essentially, I was quite shocked by this, because I'd argued in an earlier book that, in fact, one of the main beneficiaries of the American-led liberal international economic order was China. It's fried free riding, and that's it did. And to see that they wanted to replace the American Pax by Chinese ones seemed absurd to me. So this was going to be a very short book, because one of the things they were promoting then was so-called Beijing Consensus, in opposition to what's called the Washington Consensus. They found this new way of running the world through authoritarian capitalism. So it was going to be a short book to 2011, and then I started reading and thinking about it. And as soon as events unfolded, it became quite clear this had to be a much, much wider book. And then, of course, what happened, this is one of the most important themes actually in the book, that we saw towards I think certainly the second Obama administration, that there was an unwinding, a willing unwinding of the American Pax. And this is largely because Obama was waiting for the arc of history to decide the future of the world, and he had actually given up the role, they call it a superpower, whatever you like, the superpower role. So he's not willing to do any military thing. And the arc of history now is just about to envelop Idlib. I saw my newspaper today. The Russians, the Iranians, the Turks are watching. They're about to join Assad to bomb Idlib, 3 million people. So I fear for them. Anyway, so essentially what we've got since then is global disorder. This is now described as a multipolar world. Now, this is a oxymoron. What it really means is global disorder. So we're going back to what the world was like, I think, before the British Empire was established, when you had a huge number of European states vying for power, some sort of global power. This is not settled until the Brits established their hegemony after the Napoleonic Wars. So effectively, this book is really expanded now to look at both geopolitics, geoeconomics, and the last part asks, are we on the road to a third world war? Now, why the last bit is important, the Pope recently expressed an opinion, which I think amongst many others, this one is probably right. He says we're now in a piecemeal third world war, currently. And then if you look at the reading, I mean, there are two very good books which were written about the First World War, Margaret Macmillan, I forgot the other chap's name. And they have now recently commented, and they say it's very surprising, they find it quite amazing, that today the world looks very, very much like what it did before the First World War, and parts of this before the Second World War. So the book is trying to explain how we come to this past. Remember 1991, when the evil empire was over, everybody said peace and prosperity forever. You know, democracy is won globally, this thing is here. In 30 years, we're now down the tube and you're looking at another third world war possibly. In the sense, so this book covers this. So you have a bit on geopolitics, which tries to look at, and their geography is crucial, I think, in determining the various strategic options for these powers. So the people who are the powers vying for this, and we will leave with League of Dictators, Russia, China, Iran, Turkey is in this, and India, of course, is caught in the middle of all this vortex. So it's a pretty nasty world in that sense. Now, the importance of geography is important not just for culture and domestic politics, but also various ideologies. So this also discusses democratic liberalism, nationalism, religious fundamentalism. And if you like, this is the emotional grammar of the various powers vying for supremacy. Then the second part of the book, because I believe that this, certainly the Chinese, I'm absolutely certain is the case, but many of the other powers after the great financial crisis, they took this to mean that effectively America was finished economically and this global power is gone. And that's when they really, like this 2011, this thing I told you about the general, that really affected the attitude. So it's quite important to see whether, in fact, that what the causes of the Great Recession were, how it fared, and is this right? This whole story which is going around that now we need to follow this authoritarian capitalism with the Russians and Chinese are advocating rather than what used to be called the Washington Consensus. So that is, now here there is a battle going on still, and this is between the two major emerging powers, China and India, and this is great importance, obviously. And at the moment, the race between the tortoise and the hare is being won by the hare, which is China. But I argue that, in fact, the Chinese economy is much more fragile than people claim it is. And India, despite its noisy democracy and a lot of missteps, etc., has got a much more brighter future in terms of fundamentals of China. So it'll probably catch up by the 2030s if the Chinese don't start another world war. And then on the the last part is the prospect of a third world war. And here it seems to me the real danger, I mean, though you've got Iran, you've got Russia, they're all trying to challenge US hegemony. Both of those, I think it's very unlikely. They don't have the economic and military strength to actually do that. The only real challenger is China. And they're playing this rather subtle game in trying to sabotage or take over from the US. Their big hope is that just as the Americans were, as it were, handed hegemonic power by the Brits, that the Americans will do this too. So keep hearing about, G2 power system running the world and so on and so forth. The trouble is that Lee Kuan Yew put this as the best. He said, the Chinese think that they're still the middle empire, and he says, there's not a hope in hell anyone wants to join them. So their only two allies at the moment are North Korea and Pakistan. Doesn't give you much hope that this is going to be a new liberal order, free trade and all this sort of stuff. So the last part of the book is really making a case for saying, that they've overreached themselves, tremendous hubris. It could lead to a lot of flashpoints, South China Sea, Indo-Pak water, all sorts of things, where in fact you could have some incident, sparking war. And that then leads to my main conclusion, which is now, hopefully that Obama is gone. I hope this new US administration will be slightly more robust and take on its superpower role more seriously. And to contain China, what you really need, and it's beginning to happen slowly, is get a coalition of, Japan, Indonesia, question mark, Philippines has just joined the Chinese for some absurd reason, but Vietnam, Australia, and India, this can actually form a coalition which could take on China. And I think that's the best hope, if that happens, that the Chinese feel that they can't just walk over the whole of Southeast Asia and South Asia, that could prevent the Third World War. So that's the theme. I'm sorry the book's not here, but I think the flyers which tell, and I see that they're actually, I don't know whether they're trying to make up for the fact they didn't send the book, but they're now offering a 38% discount if you order it from globaloub.com academic. So just if you take that flyer, you can probably get that. And I think I hope you like the book once you get hold of it and read it.
Let me kick off the discussion, Deepak, by asking the the obvious, some might say, chauvinistic or predictable question. You're Indian. Of course, you would look at this from a biased perspective. Comment?
Well, let me put this. I mean, if I had written this about 10 years ago, I'd have said there's no hope for India whatsoever. And secondly, at that time, I mean, I, like many others, thought China, as it got richer, would become democratic and actually become a liberal.
Yeah, you and I talked about
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
So, in which case it's not something I would have, and I would certainly not have betted India then. But now it seems to me partly the internal problems, the fact that now, so obviously going back to their old imperial dream, I think the thing now really is a race between the two. And if the US, I mean, if you get this coalition, I mean, that's not just military, but also economic, that should make a difference. Mm. So it's not chauvinism, it's trying to look at this as cold-bloodedly as one can.
I remember 15, 20 years ago, Marlo Lewis, CEI, actually believing that because China had entered the global economy is increasingly technological, and that requires information and accessibility of data, and that basically the internet would force China to liberalize and abandon authoritarianism in politics the way it had to some extent in the economy. And this hasn't happened. So
exactly the opposite.
Right. So my hope and actually expectation was wrong, which is another humbling lesson in trying to think about the world a prioristically. But is there anything that a concerted strategy by the U.S. government or this group of allies with Australia, India that you mentioned, could do to try to liberalize China by somehow getting this information to the people that this government rigorously censors and suppresses?
I think it's such a firm control over the internet now. I mean, I had a friend of mine. I was visited Beijing University, and walking down the street, and suddenly a loudspeaker very loudly said, "Mr. XYZ, you're crossing the road illegally." So they've got all this facial recognition, all this sort of stuff, all this information instantaneously. So it's like a surveillance. The best example of this now, what China is doing, is 1984. And they've got all the instruments, and they're not going to give that up. But the thing at the other point where it might become liberal has nothing to do with the internet. It's just that, you see, China has a history of warlords. Now, there are no warlords at the moment, except the Chinese Communist Party now is incredibly unstable, particularly after all these purges. So there are all these princelings within the CCP now who he's made enemies of. And they're so paranoid, the Chinese Communist Party, this new forbidden city where they all live. Around that, there are 3 separate security agencies who are not allowed to talk to each other. And the only person they could talk to is Z. So he's terrified. He's terrified of a coup. So my guess is that what you're going to get is, it's not settled. His father now is put above Mao Zedong. So it's the old Chinese dynasty is created. And it's very unstable. Yeah, I thought, yeah. So was I. We all wrong.
Yes, that we were all wrong about the liberalizing effects of technology and the internet. The state turns out to be if you combine technology and coercion, you've really got something. And so the empire has struck back. But there was another part of our thinking that's it's a little less clear to me why we were wrong. And that is that as a society became wealthier and more educated, and you got hundreds of millions of middle-class people all of a sudden in China, that there wasn't a natural evolution toward more democratic forms. and a society where we have hundreds of millions of educated, smart, impressive, middle-class people who are perfectly happy to live in a society where that's run essentially by a single dictator right now for life. That's a new phenomenon,
But I think
and
that's why it's
I don't have
unstable.
an explanation for it.
Well, one of the I've been going through China. This is before Tiananmen, and who's that chap? The secretary was unsacked. Sing Huang. The general secretary who lost his job because he came out. Now he was, I knew him, and I know he thought exactly this. He said, "All the youngsters,
Right,
you're going
yes,
to
I
do
remember.
this." That was cracked down. So what the thing? I think the real story there is the CCP is so paranoid about what happened in Russia. All they want to do is to make sure that, and they will do anything to prevent that. And that's, but the thing is, what you're right is there are a huge number of people are middle class, well educated, who are in fact silent dissenters. So I don't think the Chinese Communist Party system will last. How it explodes, I mean, the two people who I trust, who know something, David Shambaugh, and who's the one at Harvard B? McFarker. And 2 years ago, they actually had our MPS meeting in Hong Kong, and they both said, and they will keep in touch with all these people. They said no one in the Communist Party believes in communism anymore. Only the leaders are terrified if they say that we don't believe in communism, it will fall apart. But they said that in any case, the question now is not if the CCP will face the same future as this Russian party, but when. And I think that's really the question. So essentially, if you look just cold-bloodedly at its future, I mean, you can see this. You can see lots of ways in which things can be destabilized. This is one. The second, unlike, I mean, they've got a huge gender imbalance. I can't remember 30 million. Now, if you look at Chinese history, most of these revolts against the center have been by what they call bare branches. The Taiwan revolt, all these, so you had huge gender imbalance. And every now and then, these members of the underclass, male, they go out and show their dissatisfaction in various ways. My great fear is, if that happens, what they're going to do is arm them and send them to Taiwan or the Indo-China. But that's another destabilizing factor. And the third, of course, is if the economy slows, that means what they're frightened of again is discontent, general discontent, not just the educated middle class, but the peasants and what have you. So if you try and look at the future of China, I think it's very unstable. I mean, India, people keep saying India's had a messy democracy, will continue hastening slowly is my favorite phrase. And it's not going to collapse no matter what happens. But China is in real danger.
Thank you. I have a question about how India would commit in the coalition. I'm Munihito Nakatani. I'm a student from Georgetown University. I understand your conclusion in the book is that a coalition would form, core being the United States, and India and Japan and all the other Asian countries would come to that coalition. But I also understand that India also has a history of a leniency towards non-alliance, more like a free hand in diplomacy. And I understand that India would also feel like threat towards the rising powers of China. But I think there's an opposing force of like the traditional foreign policy in India. And I want to know how you envision that future coalition. Would it be like a NATO alliance, kind of real hard alliance, or would it be more like a soft, like just not really like an alliance?
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, given the history between particularly the U.S. and India, goes back a long way. Henry Kissinger sent a warship when India was trying to liberate Bangladesh, and that's and there's books written about it. That background is there. That makes any formal alliance very unlikely. In my view, there are a lot of people here, I've forgotten their names, who Carnegie, what they're promoting is they say more like a business corporation. So you can disagree about various things, but certain things you have pretty close across the line. So the main thing here is military. That's the thing. And now there are a number of, I don't know how many they've been signed. I think there were 4 agreements with the US and India. And this goes back to Manmohan Singh, but Modi has continued with this, which they want first to have interoperability amongst the military. Second, intelligence sharing. But now all these are bilateral pacts in which, you know, they've concealed the fact that this is, in fact, elements of an alliance. So that'll continue. Now, the Japanese, of course, are very keen on this, they call it a quadrilateral, they want a quadrilateral, the Americans, the Australians, are the people who want to appease China more than anyone else amongst these powers. And that goes back to the fact that, you know, they had this tremendous Chinese boom based on China's investment and you know, taking on minerals, etc. But there's now a dissenting faction. A chap called White, I think, is one of the main appeasers. And I mean, I have a thing in the book in the last chapter. I mean, this is there's a very good book by E.H. Carr called The 20 Years Crisis. And he made a case for appeasing Germany, Hitler Germany. And, you know, it's a very cogent argument for realists. And then, of course, all the other realists, including Morgenthau, Hedley Bull, all said, this chap is completely immoral. You want to give up your liberties to people doing the Nazi salute, etc. And I think that is now the mood also in Australia. So the Chinese, actually, the other part of the Chinese, the plan is creating these debt-fueled investments where the people can't pay huge interest rates, they become passive. And that is a long history. It goes back to their way of handling barbarians right in something BC. So the same pattern. But there again, they're coming unstuck. But people find it. I'm now recommending. I mean, they've now the UN. Some lefties promoted something, the notion of odious debt that is sometimes overcomes this. I'm not saying the Maldives, Malaysia, all this to tell the Chinese to go to hell is odious debt, you know. So there are all these things in the air. I mean, I don't know which to. So the world now, both the developing world, if you like, plus the old great powers, they're all starting up against China. And I think that. And I just hope the new U.S. administration does that, because that's the only way. And you have to contain them by making it very difficult for them to follow this path. Yeah.
You seem to refer to the new U.S. administration several times, and you talked about Obama during the second administration pulling back. What gives you confidence that this U.S. administration will take a different position from what Obama has been doing?
Well, I'd say this is just, I mean, you know, the only thing is the rhetoric has changed. He's not talking about the arc of history. He's not talking about saying that, you know, the single world will come to die. And he's taking action. I don't know how coherent, cogent, well thought out he is. But I think there's certain people working for him. I know John Bolton, he's a sensible chap. Mattis, from all accounts, is a sensible chap. Now, who knows? Maybe they might be sacked tomorrow for what I know, but I mean, at the moment, there are people there who have more sense and are willing to play the old superpower role, which Obama completely eschewed. So it's
Syria don't give us much
what?
confidence.
Who?
Syria.
No, Syria they walked out. I mean, Syria was this whole Iraq, this whole Middle East thing. It goes back to when Obama refused to enforce an SFO agreement on Malaya. That started Iraq. Because if you had that beachhead, look at the Russians. The Russians want a small little bloody port and an airport on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. And they've leveraged that to essentially become a big player in the Middle East, which Kissinger had made sure they were not. So they're back again. And this starts with that. Then the second thing, of course, is the Syria thing, when he had his red line. And all he had to do, the Turks wanted it, the Syrian opposition wanted it, they just put up a no-fly zone, which they did when Saddam was in power in Pakistan. And he refused. And then he gave this interview to the arc history of the Russians. Putin must be laughing.
Dr. Lal, my name is Kami Bhatt. I'm with the Pakistani Spectator. And I know Dr. Fulner for a couple of decades, so I want to borrow his question about your bias. We have more wars between India and Pakistan, even though we came from the same belly. We have less peace. Do you think that we are less imaginative? We are kind of coward people that are, you think Churchill was very smart, who knew that we Desi, Dr. Fulner, Desi mean brown people. We Desi people have very
Fight
big,
each other.
yeah.
Fight each other.
Yeah. I mean, we might have empty stomach, might have empty pocket, but we have very, very big ego. So Churchill knew this, and this is the reason he left Kashmir. I mean, he shouldn't have divided India in the first place.
And I agree with that.
So my
yeah.
question is that how can we resolve this issue like Kashmir? I mean, I prefer to have India, Pakistan, just one country like it used to be before Churchill did this evil thing. But if he did it, and now Pakistani generals have a lot of interest, they don't want to have peace. And same thing about Indian generals. They don't want to have peace because they would be out of business. So how do you think we can resolve this issue? Or do you think this new guy on the block, Imran Khan, I'm asking you this question because you are more affected between the conflict between India than me, because I've been here since 85 and I went to Pakistan only 3 times. So you are more affected. Do you think this new guy, Imran Khan, who has a lot of courage, who is very much liked in India as well, he would be able to resolve this Kashmir issue?
Look, I think,
Thanks.
I think the answer is, some people say he's an army stooge. Other people say he's the only hope because he'll take on the army. I don't know the answer to that. But I'll tell you what I recommend in my book. Firstly, this whole I think the main thing now, this thing, the Indians just move all their troops from the Indo-Pak border. That's not going to happen there. And move it to the Chinese, Indo-Sino-Indian border. So the generals don't have the excuse. Say these Indians are going to cross the border from this place or that place, hence we need all this. Now, it's true, there's still a terrorist coming. But, terrorists all over the world. So you can't just run your whole country, your whole life based on the fact that terrorists coming in. And, a few people get that thing. But essentially, the politicians now, someone has to take the guts. And I was hoping Modi would do it. But now he's in political trouble because he's not delivered his promises in the economy. But someone has to take the thing and say, look, we're going to move these troops. I mean, Manmohan Singh would have done it if he stayed in power, even though when he tried to make nice noise about Pakistan, there were tremendous political backlash against him. But that's the answer, because there is nothing there. There is no issue, actually. I mean, Pakistan now, people keep saying this, the disparity in military and economic power between the two countries is so huge. There's not a hope in hell of Pakistan actually becoming a serious threat to India. So just move your troops. So,
Hi, excuse me. Hi, Carl Golovin. My question would be whether there might be a monetary or, the global monetary system is fundamental to the potential for peace or war, that our system of money now is just credit borrowed into existence at usury. And when certain nations can inflate how much they create to militarize or exert influence around the world, as through the petrodollar system, it's destabilizing. Whereas at the end of World War II, the Bretton Woods Agreement, where all the currencies were reconciled to gold, and there was a disincentive for the U.S. to overinflate, that was meant to promote stability. So a question of whether there could be a new Bretton Woods, a geopolitically neutral Bretton Woods, where nations could focus the use of their currencies for maintaining order and development within their borders, and not pursue power by expanding the flow of their currency across borders.
I'm not sure that firstly the feasibility of this. I don't think currently any international agreement is frowned upon by all sorts of people, including the current president here. So I don't think there's any hope in hell of getting another Bretton Woods. I mean, the Chinese wouldn't want that because they want their yuan. The Americans want the dollar. So I think there's not a hope in hell of that happening, whatever the arguments pro and con that. And the second point is that at the moment, given the existing situation, the fact that the dollar still reigns supreme, that's a very powerful instrument in the U.S. hands. So taking on this league of dictators is already happening. You've seen Iran, Russia, and now China. They're using the dollar weapon to actually bring some of these people to heel. How long it'll last, I don't know. But at the moment, I wouldn't give that up.
Myron Ebel, CEI. Deepak, you've talked about the withdrawal of during the Obama administration of the United States as the keeper of the world's peace or as a superpower, but part of that was due to the discrediting of the kind of Bush adventurism.
Oh, yeah.
And the tremendous waste of American treasure and lives in places where we had no business wasting things. Now, I'm wondering if you could discuss where the Trump administration might pull us back into a new responsible position and to sell it to the American people after what we've lived through with the Bushes.
Okay, let me give you my answer to that. Vaccinate. It's a controversial question. Essentially now, the Middle East, there's no role for outsiders in the Middle East. They're going to fight and kill each other. It's like a 30 years war. Okay, now the Saudis have put together a Sunni coalition. The Iranians are trying to create Shia coalition. So we are actually due for another battle of Karbala. Okay. Now, given that, we are no dogs in that fight. Who would you support, a Sunni or a Shia faction? What I want is a cordon sanitaire around the whole of the Middle East. Because the only thing we're frightened of are these people jihadis coming and murdering people on our streets. So you put a cordon sanitaire and you allow, some trade you can allow, but individuals. If you go there, you stay there, and you don't come out until they fought their battle of Karbala and then they establish enlightenment values or what have you. That's my answer. I don't have anything better than that. Because you can't. I mean, it's stupid to think that you can actually tame this region by external force. No one can do it. The Chinese now, I see are trying to intervene in the Afghan war. They think pacified. That's completely, utterly stupid. They'll have more jihadi terrorists in Xinjiang in Moscow if they do that. So I don't think there's I think we just have to take this for granted. I mean, there might have been an answer 10, 15 years ago, but the whole thing is unraveling and there's nothing you can do about it.
Hi, Alad Vaida from the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation. My question is, what more do you think that the United States can do to push back on Chinese encroachment in the South China Sea? Thank you.
Well, that's one of the flashpoints. Really serious. You see, one of the things, if you look at a map, those islands are fine. I mean, it's troubling to have the Philippines and all these people, so they consider their thing. But if you look at that as a general threat to the Indo-Pacific, and you look at the Malacca Straits, and then you look at the Andaman and Lakshadweep Islands, which are all being made into bases, that fleet sitting, those submarines fleet sitting in Hainan Island is locked up. Where's it going to go? So hence the belt, road of belt, etc. And that's not going to work. So the main, that's why this general thing that, we'll do what Japan did. They're facing the same threat. All their raw material, oil, all this comes through the sea. So unless they can control that, and they want to take over, I mean, the other thing which people forget is Taiwan. I mean, it might not be a formal ally, but it's like a huge aircraft carrier sitting just outside. And I was in Taiwan, when was it, last year? And there are two things I didn't know. Firstly, they had already on the way of creating a bomb, and had the Americans pulled the plug on. The second thing is, one of their plans, if the Chinese try to take it over, and the Indians have also got this, that Three Gorges Dam is completely vulnerable to what the Brits did with the dam busters in the Second World War. I've seen reports, because, you have to have official mention in the book, and the Chinese have poo-pooed this. This can't ever happen. So forget about Sun Tzu, forget about great Chinese, strategic this and the other. I mean, there's so many things which you can go. Yeah.
John Sitalides with Trilogy Advisors. I'd like to ask you about a different region, sir. The flyer that's handed out references Europe as an outpost of the United States. Do you see any viable role for the NATO alliance in the military containment of China? And what is your sense of the prospects for the future cohesiveness of the European Union?
The European Union is a virtual German empire. So essentially what Germany has succeeded, what it's been doing. And unfortunately, this realization now is creeping in. And the Brits are the first one to leave, but the Italian, I mean the East European. So essentially my future of the EU itself, I think, is not very bright. Okay? NATO, I think, will last for the following reason, that all these countries in Europe, East Europe, are ex-Soviet slaves, if you like, and they don't want to go back into that. So they'll continue, Germany will continue, and I don't think there is much chance of the US pulling out of NATO, despite what this thing's saying. And the main purpose is not against China, it's really Russia. That's the thing which is going to contain Russia, and I think that is life certainly until Putin dies.
Hello, Stan Yaglinski from the Daniel Morgan Graduate School of National Security. I had a question about Russian-Chinese relation and the way Trump seems to play this card against China, even though he has the whole problem with him being labeled a Russian almost agent. Do you think he's trying to use Russia against China?
Well, I'm not sure. That's too subtle. But think about the Russian-Chinese relationship. I can't know, the Russian or Chinese commentator, they described this is a relationship in which you've got a boa constrictor, wrapping itself around the so-called seeming giant and going to eat it up. And I think that is true. So I don't think that can last, because already the Chinese now are encroaching into large parts of territorial, and there's an old treaty which China ceded lots of parts of territory to Russia, so they can all be unwound. I don't think that's a lasting relationship. It'll continue as long as they think they can, do down the American. But I don't worry about Russia, quite honestly. Russia is a paper tiger. Demographically, economically, it's a paper tiger. It's a huge country and it's got all these other threats to it. The real threat is China. Russia is not a threat.
Thank you, Terry Miller from the Heritage Foundation. Could you just comment a little bit on the trade rivalry between the United States and China and the administration's attempts to really put the screws to China and even damage them in some way economically? Is that a positive strategy to contain China in this potential war you're talking about?
Well, it depends which part of this. As far as my judgment, this tariff game he's playing is really a game. He's using this as a way. I mean, I tell you the most revealing thing which happened in this. You remember the G20 meeting in wherever it was, where they had the EU and all these other people, and he put on these tariffs on these aluminum and steel, etc. And there's a video, you can see it still on YouTube, where Merkel is standing screaming at Trump, saying, "Why are you putting on all these tariffs on cars, Mercedes?" And he looks around quite calmly and he says, our tariffs on your Mercedes car is 2.5%. Your tariffs on such and such. So she looks the best. He says, what I want is no tariffs and no subsidies. Now, the point of that is, I don't know if he knows the history of this, the point of this is, this goes back to the 80s, when the US was quite committed to WTO, multilateral rules, etc. At that stage, I think agriculture was going to come onto the table, and the EU was absolutely adamant that they wouldn't do anything about it. And that's when the US started the dual track, and we got all this PT and all this stuff coming up. So if he's going to, I don't know where he's going to do it. If he's going to go back to saying, look, forget all this WTO mandated PTOs, etc. Let's have genuine free trade. I'd be all right with that. So it's just a question, I don't know, what game is he playing? You people know much better than I.
Seika from Georgetown University. So now is there trading war happening with, like so-called trading war happening with U.S. and China? What do you think if China lost their like so-called loss again the trading war? Do you think their market going to be liberal or the like media going to be liberal than before?
Well, depends how far they go. You know, I mean, that's the thing is, how far are they going to go? I mean, essentially, trade wars damage both sides. And then, you know, you can, people tried it, all sorts of Napoleon tried this thing around Europe, and they never work ultimately. But if this is a strategic game to take on the Chinese, make them uncomfortable, what have you, well, so be it.
Drinking bout.
Yeah,
Can you outdrink the other guy?
Yes, that's
And the fact is, they've got 600 billion coming into us, and we've got 50 billion going to them. Let's keep drinking.
Yeah, so that's just. Anyway, but I think it's a game he's playing, and I don't know whether it'll work or not. I have no idea whether it'll work.
Deepak, this has been a wonderful conversation. I regret with you that Oxford University
Don't
quite
publish with
capable of-
OUP. I'm not.
getting
I'd
the books
stopped.
here.
No, I'd stopped for
But,
many years. Big mistake.
We will certainly make sure that they are made available to our friends here too when they do become available. We thank you very, very much for being with us.
Thank you.